Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 88 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is now. Our quote of the day comes to us from John F. Kennedy. If not us, who? If not now, when? Today's episode is sponsored by the Rocket Entrepreneur. Are you ready for a breakthrough in your business? Learn from myself and 25 other successful influencers and thought leaders sharing how to make 2018 your best year yet. We're going to give you specific advice and strategies to help you break through your plateau and make 2018 your most profitable year ever. This online event is 100% free, and you can watch the interviews on your own time when it fits your schedule. The online event is called The Rocket Entrepreneur. Blast past plateau and make more money than ever in 2018. Please visit www.therocketentrepreneur.com. Once again, that's www.therocketentrepreneur.com. I'm very excited to bring you today's episode, which features a woman by the name of Amy Jo Martin. In addition to being a best-selling author, Amy Jo is also the host of the Why Not Now podcast. One thing that Amy Jo mentions on today's podcast I thought was spot on. She mentioned how when purpose, passion, and skill collide, bliss resides. If you are thinking about an idea or a concept, ask yourself this very simple question: why not now? I hope you enjoyed today's episode in hearing from Amy Jo. Amy Jo, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today?
I am, of course. Let's do this.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. I was curious if you had either a no-quit story yourself or a story of perseverance where you had the opportunity to give up, but you didn't and you kept on going.
Absolutely. I have too many. Let's see. The thing that comes to mind the most is, I guess, as an entrepreneur, we elect to get on this crazy roller coaster ride. And we know there will be highs and lows, big ones, sometimes within minutes of each other. And as an entrepreneur, I think there are probably, daily situations where it would be pretty easy to quit. and we don't. Because things can change so quickly too. And so it seems like that dynamic feeling between highs and lows, you start to get a little bit more used to it, and your tolerance for that potential quitting threshold starts to shift, and hopefully it goes up. But just in general, as an entrepreneur, when you're running your company, 100 things could go wrong in a day. And if you don't build up that just kind of tolerance, then you're not going to be in business long.
No, and I appreciate you sharing that. And the question I have for you is building up that tolerance. Do you think that's something that just happens over time, or is that something you feel some people have in them and some people don't?
I think it's a little bit of both. Experience is, of course, in play, and you have to learn how to work through. And the more you do that, the better at it, of course, you'll be. And I think just in general, people are wired a little differently. And a lot of it has to do with your risk tolerance. Are you the type of person that needs to have everything mapped out and know you have a certain level of stability or not? And so that's a big component into the formula too. But it isn't just one thing. I think there are many factors that go into that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think as an entrepreneur and a business person myself, I think as you go through different phases of life, you probably have highs and lows when it comes to your risk tolerance as well. And I think it's a challenge. And one of the things we've been so fortunate is to get some incredible guests. And speaking of incredible guests, you have a very successful podcast yourself. And I wanted to ask you two quick questions. The first question is, how did you land some of those huge guests that you have on your show? And the second question is, what inspired you to actually go ahead and create your show?
So for your first question, and they're actually related, of course, everything is. I spent about 8 years running my own company, working with a lot of big brands and high profile clients. And prior to that, worked in the NBA for the Phoenix Suns in professional sports. So just a combination of the things I've done in my career path has led me to being exposed to and meeting and working with some pretty incredible renegades, as I like to call them. So most of these people I've had some sort of connection with in the past, and it makes it a little easier then to ask, hey, do you want to come on my show? Your second question, how did it get started? I believe that was it, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. It was a why not now moment. So on the show, I bring these people on and we dissect a moment when they had to ask themselves, why not now? And we really get into it and zoom in and look at the things that happened in that day, moment, hour, tactically and tangibly, so listeners can learn. In my case, it was a similar thing. So I've had these conversations with people like Mark Cuban, like Tony Hsieh, you name some of these renegades, and I've always wished more people could hear the conversations because they've helped change and guide my life so much. So I knew I wanted to start a podcast. I just didn't know when, and I didn't know what it would be around or what it would be called. And I was going on a walk one day, and I just thought, when am I going to start this? And it was well, why not now? I have really no excuse not to do this right now. Why not right now? And then the question popped up in my mind of, what's the concept? What's it going to be called? And why not now kept surfacing in my life, that term, that mentality, and it just made a lot of sense. If something keeps surfacing over and over, it's a pretty big indicator or sign that you need to be paying attention.
I love that story, and I love the title of your podcast, and it just resonates so well with the No Quit family, is why not now? And that's one of the things that I mentioned to you before we went live, is the two areas we focus on are accountability and self-accountability. And I have to tell you that I've said those three words, why not now, so many times, not only to myself, but also to a lot of my clients, because it comes to a point in life where you have the choice of doing something or not doing it. And the natural question is, why not now? And I just love the fact that that's where your show came from. And I think it just has so much correlation to all different aspects of life, not in any way tied to just being an entrepreneur or business, but in relationships, in all different walks of life, success, personal development. So I really commend you for doing that. And it is a very catchy title.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And agreed. It definitely transcends business. It's every facet of our life. One of the things, Tony Robbins came on the show, and one of the things he said is his favorite, word is now. And he always asks his team, when would now be a good time? When would now be a good time? So it really does ring true. If you don't take action pretty quickly after you have an idea, then it oftentimes doesn't ever happen.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we talk about accountability, and we have what we call the 3 A's of accountability, which are application, attitude, and action. And I think if I had to say which one of the three is the most important, I would definitely say it's action, because you could have the best of information, the best knowledge, the best coaches or managers or bosses, but if you take little to no action, you're going to yield zero results. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And I did listen to that episode with Mark Cuban, and he's a guest that I'd love to get on my show, and I've reached out to him many times, and the whole philosophy of our show is no quit, so I'm definitely not going to quit. So if anybody has that direct connection to Mark Cuban, feel free to make an introduction.
There you go. And it's not no, it's just not right now, right? You keep going.
No, exactly. And you never quit and you never give up. So I wanted to ask you a question. How do you define success?
I define success as a feeling. I'm just speaking off the top of my head here of what's coming to mind. And that's the first thing that definitely popped in. It's a feeling, and it's a combination of feeling like you've achieved something, but also that it matters to you. So it's not just one or the other. And I strongly believe that where purpose, passion, and skill collide, bliss resides. It's a little phrase I made up a long time ago. And that intersection is success.
Do you mind repeating that one more time?
Where purpose, passion, and skill collide, bliss resides.
I love it. Have you trademarked that or coined that?
I've said it a ton. I've definitely have been repeating that one for years and years. So I haven't formally necessarily gone through that process, but if anyone takes it out there, we'll know. We'll know.
I'm gonna take it this afternoon. No, I just asked that because I know a lot of different people, especially with shows and things, have trademarked different things. But I think it's an awesome saying, and it's the first time that I've heard it. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So
yeah, well, and it doesn't really. Hopefully, people will it'll resonate, and it's not really about who owns it. I guess when you think about it, the more the merrier. We need more people to find that intersection.
I could not agree more. We need more people to find the intersection and to actually take action with it. So here might be a tough question. If you had to define yourself in one word, what would that word be?
Intense. That's the first word that comes to mind, so I'm running with it. I bring a lot of energy to pretty much every situation in my life. So it's not just business. It's just, intense or energy. Those words kind of come to mind. Is you might as well go all out if you're going to do something.
Now, if you're going to do something, that it only makes sense to give 100%. So one of the things we talk about on our show is personal development. And I was curious if you've read something recently, or perhaps you'd like to recommend a book or two to our listeners.
Absolutely. There's one book that I just have been talking about this week, and it's called The Sober Entrepreneur by Russ Perry. And he talks about all types of different addictions and how we are all addicted to something, whether it's success or recognition or substances, or there are all types of sways. And it's really interesting. He's very vulnerable about his path and story. And he breaks it down. It's not just for entrepreneurs. It's not just for people who, may be addicted to substances. It's a way to kind of look at life in general, and it's the ultimate life hack, really. Another book, there are so many. I'm trying to think of something more recent. It's not recent at all, but it just came to mind, and that's Thrive by Arianna Huffington. I read that years ago, but it just actually popped up into my pathway today. So it's top of mind.
I appreciate you sharing those two. I have heard of Thrive, but I had not heard of The Sober Entrepreneur. So we'll definitely put those two in our show notes, and I appreciate you sharing those. Here's an interesting question. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself only one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
I'd say ease up. That's probably the intense personality in myself. Ease up a bit. You don't need to run so fast. That would be my advice.
It's interesting that you say that, because that concept of ease up and slow down in some combination or some similarity has been mentioned probably 10 or 12 times on our show. And I think in today's day and age with technology and all the advancements and things being so easily accessible and you can press a button and be connected, I think that's something that I would have liked to have given that advice to myself, 20-year-old version myself, because I think once you get going, you tend to go 110 miles an hour, especially in the business world, entrepreneurial world. So I think that probably has a lot of overlap in all different areas of life. So I think that's a good advice that we probably all could learn from.
Yeah, and it's also, I think when we're going at a pace where we can recognize what our intuition and what kind of our internal GPS is saying, then we're much better off. I mean, there have been times where I've really struggled with knowing the difference between when to let things happen versus make them happen. And I thought just pushing on the gas and making something happen and kind of forcing it, because I knew I could if I pushed hard enough. That has not helped me, and there are times when you really need to do that, but knowing the difference, it's pretty powerful.
No, I agree with that. And I think there are definitely times in life and in business and sports is, you put the pedal down and you get after it. But there's also times, like you mentioned, is you do need to ease up in some ways, and you do have to let things happen. And that's so much easier said than done, because a lot of times I know that I find once I get involved in a project or something that I'm working on, you kind of, focus and you get blinders on. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
You bet. Absolutely.
Here's a different question, and changing lanes a little bit, is if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Abe Lincoln is always someone that I've been kind of fascinated by. And it boils down to one of the quotes that he's famous for, which is, a person is about as happy as they make up their minds to be. So he's one that I've always had a fascination with. I've recently been watching The Crown, and so why not throw Queen Elizabeth in there, her hat in the ring, if I get to choose who. And then just some relatives that, like my grandfather, my mom's dad, I did never get a chance to meet. And there's a ton of curiosity and desire just to get to know him better.
Abraham Lincoln is the number one answer to that question. And I think it just resonates so much. We talk about with No Quit Living is everybody knows of Lincoln's history as far as being a president. And most people are familiar with some of his failures, but almost every single person that talks about it and mentions him on the show brings back something along the lines that he could have quit or he could have given up, and he had every reason to, but he didn't. And I think his story is remarkable, because if you trace what happened to him before he became elected as a president, it's just a remarkable story, because he literally could have given up 10, 15 different times, but he didn't. And because he didn't, he became the president of the United States and went on to do some pretty remarkable things. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And it's really interesting, because before I thought about asking those questions, and having now asked that question almost 100 times, I didn't really think one way or the other who would be the number one answer, but it's very interesting that it's Abraham Lincoln.
It is. It sounds like you've got a bit of a theme there.
So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners about some of the stuff that you're working on, or perhaps something that you're working on that's coming out soon.
Sure. Sounds good. The podcast that we mentioned, the Why Not Now show, is a huge focus of mine. And one of the things that's new about it is that after working really up close and personal with some of the world's most iconic renegades for the last 15 years or so, plus interviewing about 100, I've started to spot some trends and some behavioral, similarities. And so I'm excited to be able to distill that a bit and share it. And I'm just determining right now how and what that looks like, and maybe some innovative ways of doing that beyond just the traditional kind of obvious ones. But that's, if we look at behavior and start to look at what are the specific steps and things people do when they go from idea to action, when they go from dreaming to doing, it's really valuable because we do have so many inspirational quotes floating around out there on Instagram, social media, and those are great. And one of the things, though, that they don't have is, yeah, but how? It's great to get a little injection of inspiration, but if you can't convert that into action and know what to do, it has a short shelf life. So I'm really excited about that.
It sounds interesting, and I think obviously your prior podcast world, you were in the business world and working also in the sports world. You take all of that, and I just think it's really interesting. You touched on two things which I just wanted to repeat, as you said, idea to action and dreaming to doing. And I think the reality is the fact that you've interviewed some of the most successful people from all different walks of life, business, sports, entertainment. I think, as you mentioned, you do see some trends. And I think that's been the really interesting part for me, back to my comment a couple minutes ago about the Abraham Lincoln reference, is that you do see trends. And I think what happens is you need to take action. And there's a significant difference, I feel, in people that take an idea or a concept and put it into actual action. And that's why one of the questions I asked you earlier is actually taking your idea and then creating your podcast. And then so many people dream about different things, but not everybody does it. And that's the one thing that we aim to do on the show is to share people's no-quit stories. And some of them have been big, small, amazing, recent, a long time ago. But what we want to do is we want to be able to connect with someone on every single episode and motivate them to put that idea into action. And when they're thinking about giving up, they hear someone's story about, I almost filed for bankruptcy, or I failed the first 7 times, but it was the 8th time. So I really appreciate you saying those two things. I'm definitely gonna start talking about those, is the idea to action and dreaming to doing.
Yeah, it definitely is powerful.
So we're gonna switch it up here, what we call our hot seat questions. So if you're open for it, what we'd like to do is we have a couple questions, and if you could just mention or say the first thing that comes to mind.
You bet.
All right. If you only had one last meal, what would you choose for your last meal?
French fries.
What is your favorite sport?
Basketball.
Awesome. Your favorite team?
The Phoenix Suns.
All-time favorite movie?
Pretty Woman.
Do you have an all-time favorite book?
Man Searching for Meaning, I'd say.
Favorite singer?
Viktor Frankl.
Yep, that's a great
Go
book.
ahead.
Favorite singer or band?
Oh, geez. Oh, wow. I'm just going pure into genres right now. And favorite, Nora Jones has always been a timeless one for me.
You can't go wrong with Nora Jones. And then last question, if you were in a foxhole and you could only choose one person to have your back, who would it be?
My husband.
Good answer. So I have to, full and fair disclosure, I am a basketball wacko myself. I played college basketball and coached AAU high school and college basketball. So definitely kudos for answering that way.
There you go.
So before I let you go, I wanted to ask if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Oh, I guess I would just double down on what we mentioned earlier about really kind of tuning in to your decisions and thinking through, why you're doing what you're doing. And there's no greater ROI than spending your time in that zone of really knowing and understanding and believing in why you're doing what you're doing. Simon Sinek says it best, and he's written books on it, but it's a pretty good way to keep yourself in check.
No, it's a great way to keep yourself in check, and I think that's a question that we often ask or hear, but I don't think we often enough answer it ourselves, is why you're doing what you're doing. So I appreciate you sharing that. And last question, I promise it's an easy one, is for our listeners that would like to connect with you, in addition to your amazing podcast, which I definitely would recommend them listening to, is what's the best way for them to connect or follow you?
So you can find me on pretty much every social media channel. I'm at Amy Jo Martin, and amyjomartin.com is my website. And then the Why Not Now podcast is on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or you can just go to amyjomartin.com/Why Not Now.
Amy, I can't thank you enough. I truly appreciate not only your time, but sharing what you share with us. And again, I would definitely recommend our listeners to follow you on social media and definitely check out your podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I look forward to hearing from people and hopefully getting their feedback too.
Thank you for listening to episode number 88. Amy Jo absolutely delivered today with her simple yet extremely powerful words. She spoke about 2 concepts I wrote down and fully believe in: idea to action and dreaming to doing. Our call to action today is pretty straightforward. Why not now? If there is something you are thinking about doing, wanting to do, or maybe begin, do it. Why not now? And why not today? Take that idea and put it into action. And if you have a dream, do something about it. Don't just sit on the sidelines. Get in the game and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.